Good morning, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. I think before we do anything else, I'll just go to approving members' remote participation. Happy to do that. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website and obviously on YouTube. Can I please remind you of a few arrangements in the guidance note? Microphones should be muted and videos switched off when you're not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write "speak" in the Teams chat function, and you will be invited to speak in order about new issues. I'm always quite flexible that way as well, though. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that so that we can deal with the business as efficiently as possible. Always looking for nice, open, honest debate, though, to make sure we get to the substance of the matter. The usual our standards orders will apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. Don't imagine there will be any. And if any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, can I remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for the period of that time, or can you write "leave" in the Teams chat function and then rejoin or write "join." This is required to allow us to record members' presence, and please do not use the chat function. There is something in the background, isn't there? But this allows you to use the chat function for any contribution or that are material to debate. I just better double check it's not myself, but there is a noise in the background somewhere. I'll just turn this off, make sure it's not me. But the first item on the business is said apologies and chairs approval. We've done the chair's approval, so Claire, can you provide us with said apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. One apology this morning from Councillor Bell. For the benefit of those on Teams, we have 3 councillors in the hall, being yourself, Councillor Scobie and Councillor Thompson. All other members present on Teams. One member currently not present, being Councillor Ronnie.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. I'm not sure, is it your speaker's not on by some chance? Is your phone off, Willie?
You've got silent, folks.
Oh. Sorry, what was that, Councillor McKee? Councillor McKee, did you say something there? I apologise, I missed that.
It went off halfway, Claire speaking, so I don't think it's your mic, Ian, but we can't hear anything online.
Okay, we'll just have a wee sound check. So we're coming up now, so the notice has come up, there's no sound. So my lips should be moving, according to others, but we'll just give us a wee minute. If you could you put something in chat? Just to ask once we've made sure. So we're doing our due diligence, so to speak.
We're still not hearing anything, Ian.
Okay.
Still can't hear you.
Okay, we've got that, so we'll just try to amend that. So if somebody could put in the chat, if that's possible, just say we're on the fix, and we'll not suspend the meeting, but we'll just hold quiet for a minute until we get that done. Thank you for that. Thanks very much.
Remote participation is not working. Is that what you want, is it?
Maybe it is working, we just can't hear anything, that's quite good.
It might be a good idea. You know?
Hello, just having a wee sound check. Can anybody hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, thanks for that. I had to take them insults without any reaction back, but for the avoidance of doubt, they will be recorded and I will be taking action afterwards. Anyways, so it's Claire, back to you. I think we missed out the full, it will be recorded, but just may as well go over the said apologies and for yourself, Claire, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Again, one apology from Councillor Bell, 3 councillors in the hall, being yourself, Councillor Scobie and Councillor Thompson. All other members present on Teams, apart from Councillor Ronnie, who's currently not present. Thank
you. So Councillor Ronnie's apologies will be definitely getting feedback for some. I'm not sure if it's. I'm getting some somewhere. Is it that? Maybe the speaker's on. We'll just give a wee second just to see so it's a little bit of feedback, and if somebody can just tell me, can they still hear me? Okay.
Can hear you fine, Ian.
Yeah.
Aye, 1, 2 test. That's it, go on, thank you. Excellent, thank you. That's it. Sorry, I was hearing the noise. I was blaming Wally and everything for his leaving his mic on. I was getting odd looks. So, anyways, that's it. Sorry, thanks very much for that. Appreciate that. That helps. Excellent. So, declarations of interest is our second agenda item. Do any members have any declarations of interest? I don't personally. There's nobody in the room got any. So I'll just give it 2 or 3 seconds for anybody to come up. And if for some reason something pops into your mind, you can add that at any point as we go through the meeting as well. There's no hand. I don't see anything coming up within our chat function that's displayed in front of me. Item number 3 is minute of a previous meeting of December the 14th. We're asking for this to be approved. Does this show a true reflection of what took place on that day? So my recollection, I missed the very end of it. So if it's okay, Councillor McKee's moved that. No, you were there for the whole meeting, Jane, I think.
Very happy to second.
Excellent. So we'll take that as being a true reflection. Certainly what I've seen up to when I left was absolutely bang on. Item number 4 is the follow-up service progress against recommendations from the internal audit reports on direct payments, prepaid cards, report by acting Chief Social Worker. Sean Barrett, I think, has got to be taking this. I'll open this up to members' debate. But Sean, just before we do, I see you're online. Just have you got anything to say, add, comment, whichever way you want to play this, Sean, and then we'll go to members after that. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The report aims to satisfy committee that control issues identified by internal audit have been appropriately addressed by management. It covers the prepaid card audit report update in December 20. 11 recommendations were made and previous reports gave assurance that 8 had been implemented. There were 3 outstanding recommendations and these have not been fully implemented due to available resources and the Scottish Government advice during the pandemic period, which was increased flexibility and light touch monitoring for service users and their personal assistants. Paragraph 3.8 in the report indicates that as resources are freed up as the pandemic response eases, a risk-based approach to monitoring will be restarted, and it has been restarted in some areas. This will involve matching expenditure to assessed care needs. Paragraphs 3.11 and 3.12 indicate that over the pandemic period we've seen balances on prepaid cards increase from £1 million to £1.7 million due to inability and availability of respite services and wider personal assistant care for service users. The service will look to recover these balances whilst protecting future delivery. All service users have at least 8 weeks of funded care on their prepaid cards, so nobody is left at risk through this exercise. And happy to take any questions around about that.
Thanks so much for that, Sean. I'm looking in the room first to see Councillor McKee. Your hands came up straight away. Nobody in the room's come up. Jock?
I suppose it's a bit of a cheeky question, and I would have faith in the people that's using the cards, but are you quite comfortable that there's no abuse of the cards by any holder of the cards at all?
Thanks, Councillor McKee. In all circumstances, we can never be 100% sure, but what we do is we have some higher level checks. So what we have continued to do is to check sort of account type spends. So see if we see any spends, in likes of supermarkets, petrol stations, then we'll have a bit of query just to understand with that. Anything that doesn't look quite right, flags, we have that overview. We won't capture everything, and the flexible use makes it a bit difficult to always capture something, but we put blocks on certain types of expenditure, so we're satisfied that way. But during this period, we can't. We've captured everything, and every spend has been appropriate. But we've tried to be a bit flexible alongside that. But we will start to look at that in more detail as our resources are increased. But fairly satisfied, but I couldn't be 100% sure that there wasn't some inappropriate spend.
That's fine, thank you. Given the length of time that people have had to operate with these cards and not necessarily getting checked all the time, it's been difficult for them as well. So I have faith in their staff as well. Thanks very much for your answer, though.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jock. It looks like I've got Councillor Young, then Councillor Maitland. Correct me if I'm wrong. If that's correct, then it's Councillor Scobie after that. John?
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Sean, for your report. Good morning, members. These cards are to provide payment to personal assistants to carers employed by the client. Is that correct, Sean?
Thanks, Councillor. Yes. What happens is when someone wants to take control of their own care, we assess their need and we cost up that need onto a prepaid card, and it's then up to them how they want to do it. They can employ personal assistants, and then they will operate their own payroll, or they will use something like Capability Scotland or Spain to run that payroll for them. But they can also have other outcomes which aren't just personal assistance. That could be sort of more flexible use, a bit of respite, money for going to do respite, and then they treat that almost like a debit card, but with the reward on it. We then monitor through reports what they spend that, and we match it to their outcomes. And any issues that come up, we will contact social worker and just say, could you have a review of the individual to make sure they're happy with what they're spending and it is achieving the outcomes that it was intended for.
That's what I thought, Sean. I thought that's how the system worked. So there'll be no record of the client, should we call them the client, actually receiving care visits? Are they required to keep a diary of when people provide care to them? And I know this would be a very difficult period, so I can understand the light touch of monitoring the situation. But I'm just wondering how closely are the carers' visitors being monitored? Do they rely just on the word of the client, or is there a recording system in place as there is for home care?
Well, there's no recording system. What we will do though is we will get sight of payroll records, and we will see payments going out. So in effect, if we assess someone and we'll assess their needs and say, we assess you needing 12 hours of care, and they go off and employ a personal assistant, then we will see invoices going through the prepaid card to that personal assistant, and ideally it will come back to the 12 hours that we've assessed them as needing. If we don't see anything coming through, then that indicates that there's no visit. Or if we see expenditure which is not a personal assistant, then we would query that as well, to understand, well, what is it that how are you getting your 12 hours of care, because we can't see it on the prepaid card record.
Thanks, Sean. Chair, if you'll indulge me, could I ask one more question? Is there any check on whether the client employs a relative?
We, as part of the assessment, if you want to employ a relative, you have to seek sort of very senior social work authority to do that, and a number of checks are gone through, because we don't recommend going all, in very exceptional circumstances would we allow the employment of a relative. That said, the only check that we would have then is on the name of the personal assistant after that, and we would expect, as part of the review that's carried out on the person's outcomes, is we would ask, who's that personal assistant, how are you doing with your personal assistants, to try and to gauge it that way. We couldn't, if somebody wanted to use a family member and not let us know, then in theory you could get away with it. But we do a number of checks, and we do ask the individual how they're getting on, etc. And you would hope that it would come out during that conversation.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, John. I would imagine, John, at 2.2 the recommendations we'll get there. If you feel there's more information required in regards to your particular line of questioning, you'd be more than appropriate to bring it up at that point if you want to include that in a follow-up report, or we might just put it to bed. We've got Councillor Maitland next. Jane.
Thank you, Chairman. What I was wondering about is that we are supposed to be considering whether the correct balance is being struck between the costs of monitoring and the risk that the service faced, or that the public purse faces. And Sean, I see that in recommendation in answer in paragraph 3.6.1 that there was checking that went on through the pandemic in one locality. So it was clearly possible to do it. But nevertheless, I can't tell from this report, actually, exactly how much it did cost. So I'm being asked to balance it up, but in fact, I don't know how much it costs to monitor it. Now, I see that you are proposing to do different monitoring, although I'm not absolutely certain what that means. But I'm not totally certain whether I'm in a position at the moment, with the information that sits in front of me, to say whether I can make a judgment between cost and risk. I wonder if you can help me with that.
Thanks, Councillor Maitland. Our structure has what we call admin assistant care management, who basically go out and source the care once everything's been assessed. And we have local support admin assistants who work closely with them, and they do a range of sort of admin style tasks within the locality. And one of these is the monitoring of spend to assure ourselves that we're getting value for money and we're spending the taxpayers' money properly. We will never be able to resource 100% check on every single item of spend, so we have to balance risk in that. And what we do is we'll have a model which will identify certain checks, spend in certain areas, individuals who constantly don't put their sort of ability to pay their contribution to the care package onto the card, individuals who constantly run high balances and then all of a sudden there's a flurry of activity. These are all triggers that we have that will instigate us to go and look at more detailed monitoring. Also size of awards, etc., and the type of outcomes that I mean. If it's a personal assistant, it's a much easier one to monitor. But when there's different items built onto the care package, the risks increase. So we will balance that against all of these. There's certain definite checks that we will always make, and that is around about the high balances. When there's high balances, we will review them, and we will work with social work to understand what are the issues with the individual, why are they not spending their money, and then certain items we will challenge when they stick out, and they do stick out like a sore thumb. A lot of these, but everybody and anybody would, but you could manipulate the system in certain areas, and we just have to have these triggers to be able to identify that. So the costs of a full monitoring, you're probably talking is four members of staff, potentially up to 100k per annum is full monitoring. But we spend £7.3 million annually on this. The one locality that was able to monitor throughout the pandemic, it was probably more fortuitous. It was our most probably experienced member of staff in this prepaid card audit process who was in that locality and was able to balance their current work with some of the monitoring. We went through a significant turnover of staff throughout the pandemic period. We lost a lot of vital experience, and we're now starting to replace that experience and get trained up in that area. So I hope that kind of gives you some reassurance, Councillor Maitland. But if not, I'm happy to discuss this in any further concerns you have.
Chairman, could I come back just to check?
Absolutely, Jane. I'll allow it to flow, and I'll come in when you're ready to stop.
Thank you very much. Right, so we're saying that you will be putting back the support staff, the administrative support staff, and that they will be able to carry on. You think this is a blip? Right. Well, that's useful to know at this stage. Thank you for that. Chairman, there is one other question, which is about the level of risk. If we do not monitor the debt that people find themselves in because they have not contributed, I think that's, it's not a kindness. And I think I would like some reassurance that is not allowed to happen, that people are challenged and tackled early on and helped, frankly, because at the end of the day, it is a debt. And we don't want that to happen. It's not fair on the public. It's not fair on the person. Can I have assurance that that is being dealt with?
Thanks, Councillor Maitland. Yes, that's one of the outstanding 3 recommendations, and that is it's probably one of the easier ones to monitor. So we have started to do those checks again, and then where we identify it, we address it. To work on and open the discussion with the individual on why. Is it an oversight? Is it because they just refuse to pay their contribution to the care? And then we take it from there. So that one has started up again, and that is an area that we will definitely, until the full understanding of the Scottish Government's review of non-personal care charges moves on, we will continue to monitor that and step up our monitoring in that area.
Okay, Jane, I think you're comfortable with that. Again, I'll just say the same words to yourself, did we, John, there, that in recommendation 2.2, if you feel there's more information required or a further report, we can address it at that point. Willie, Councillor Scobie, you're next. Willie.
Thanks, Chair. I'm maybe coming at it from a different angle, and I'm looking at 3.7. The questions have been asked in terms of the audit and the accounts and so forth. I'm more concerned with or equally concerned with the service delivery. And it says in 3.7, the service has had to prioritise the sourcing of care and the flexible use of health and social care resources. We've heard Sean saying that when people on self-directed support are assessed, then we source the service that's required, which is fine. I just wonder against the availability of that source, whether there are people out there who are not getting that care, whether it's something that we should be looking at as an audit and risk committee. Because I look at 3.11 here, and it does refer to over the pandemic period and in line with the Scottish Government's guidance in maintaining current self-directed support option 1 award and increasing the flexibility of their use. We already know that there's some 3,500 hours of unmet need in Dumfries and Galloway. We are the highest in the whole of Scotland, so we are, in terms of not meeting that need. And then we had Audit Scotland, I think just a number of weeks back there, saying that there is an immediate need for reform of the care system. I just wondered if we've looked at this in this audit, or whether that should be within social work and or IJB. So it's the delivery and the risk of people out there, or the risk that people are being put to under this self-directed support, that there is not enough care source to provide the needs that they require.
Thank you. We'll over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Councillor Scobie. Yes, you're totally right, and in effect, this will be part of the 3,500 hours of unmet need that you allude to. The option 1, which is a direct payment, is an alternative to us organising the care at home for an individual. So the person has that choice, but personal assistants are just as scarce as care at home providers. And the partnership are trialling a number of areas and looking at this and how do they make that role a more attractive role and increase the capacity. At the same time, looking at alternatives to care where technology can be used, where we can re-able individuals so that they don't need as much of the care at home personal assistant resource. It's a challenge. Without a doubt, and that will be part of the reason why balances have gone up. But in the background, everyone in receipt of an option 1 is considered alongside everybody else, and to make sure their needs are met, and how can we make sure they're safe and not vulnerable whilst they struggle to get that care that they need. So I don't know if that satisfies you. There is no, I don't have an answer for how are we going to address the care. Hopefully the recent increase to £10 and 2 pence per hour, and then the subsequent increase in April to £10.50 an hour, whilst far off the £15 per hour that has been mooted as what's required to make it an attractive career. Hopefully they'll start to make some inroads, and we use we'll look at using prepaid cards and personal assistance differently, depending on where you are, and we help to try and facilitate that discussion, and we work with the personal assistance network, etc., to see how we can make it a more attractive career and work environment.
No, I think and I appreciate the response that I've got from Sean, but the report in itself doesn't highlight the crisis that the care sector is in, particularly in Dumfries and Galloway, who's sitting at the highest in Scotland in terms of delivery. Delayed discharges comes into that as well. That's the responsibility of the IGB and Health Board. So it's really that whole issue of how do we meet that need. And I remember when self-directed support came in many years ago, that was an issue in terms of are we able to deliver to the people who do opt out and take self-directed support. And it sounds from what Sean was saying that there's a number of them fit into this 3,500 of unmet need. And it's how do we, as a council, meet that need in the current climate, and recognising Audit Scotland saying that it needs complete reform. Appreciating what Sean's saying, we've put that forward, that perhaps if we were paying them the remuneration that they deserve in terms of care workers, then we might attract more into the industry. But that's for government, and I would hope that we would reflect that in our decision today.
Thanks, Wally. So I'm just got I'm going to ask for a bit of advice here. So I think, because I'm looking at 2.2 in regards to what you're saying, but I'm also looking at page 59 and at agenda item 6, which he's asking us is about future particular subject matters. So at 2.3 it says agree any areas of activity in 2022 in relation to the audit risk scrutiny as referenced in paragraph 3.8, which is in general what load do you want in that the following year coming up. But also I think, in as far as the social work committee, what you're talking about almost touches on all three. So I'm just looking for a bit of advice in regards to that, Vlad, if you don't mind. The point that Wally's trying to achieve here, which I think is an important point, because there's obviously a deficiency in regards to the level of human resource that's out there to that 3,500 hours of unmet need. Where does it best? So if Wally's wanting to take that forward, is it best here? Is it social work? Is it in item 6? So future workload, is it a follow-up report to this? Just a bit of advice, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a good question. It does straddle a couple of the committees, as you've mentioned, particularly the IGB work. So that would be the primary place for that relevant scrutiny. And I would suggest that that's the rightful forum for these discussions, because you could discuss in the finer details of it. So that would be my advice, that through that IGB system would be the process for that full scrutiny. However, Social Work Committee also has a part to play in terms of overseeing some of that, and the Council as well. And on top of that, you've got your own audit risk and scrutiny role, which allows us to scrutinise services, and you can if you require it, but it would need to be very specific as to what that is, so that it doesn't interfere with the other forums that are already looking at the same question.
Thank you very much for that. So you'll obviously get the last word when it comes to it, whether it's through the recommendation or not, but you didn't sit in the IGB, Willie, if I'm correct. So I'm thinking, for a member, sit myself in Willie's particular shoes, would that be the best forum for him, or would it be better placed within the council? But maybe if you come back, and we'll move on to the next speaker. Willie, you next.
Yeah, take the advice that Vlad is proffering there. There was a report went up to the IGB just recently, and that was following a discussion that we had at full council I don't know what the outcome of that debate or discussion was, or what they agreed from the report. So it is for the IGB to try and source or find a way to address the deficit. But it's for this committee, as I understand, to see, is that being addressed on a specific issue? Are those hours being addressed, and how's it being addressed? And are people still at risk, and is council at risk?
No, thank you. So we'll come back to that particular point when we get to recommendations, and we can pan it out then. So it comes for Thompson, then it comes for Hagman, then Thompson. Katie, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask around this topic that we've just been touching on anyway. But so the item that we're looking at just now is the internal audit report on the direct payment prepaid cards. So just to focus on that specific aspect, because I appreciate that there's a wider debate that we should be having. And, obviously I'm happy to note the progress that's been made, and, we're being asked to decide if a follow-up report on outstanding actions is required. I'm conscious that, and I've had a look online, there's nothing in the Council's forward plan coming to social work about the actions that social work committee may be taking forward. So in 3.8, there is recommendations that are being considered by social work services, and I just want to ensure, are these going to be taken to the delegated committee for that? And Sean, and it's really maybe to sort of ask your thoughts on this, Sean. Are you content and happy that the service has the capacity to monitor this going forward? Maybe you may not feel comfortable in answering that, but I think it's important because there are those 3 outstanding actions, and if the service committee has that remit going forward, or can we as a audit, risk and scrutiny committee recommend an action to go onto the forward plan for social work going forward? Because who's overseeing these budgets and where there is overspend? So that's my first point. If I can ask that, and then I'll maybe come in again, Chair, if that's okay.
Thanks, Katie. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Councillor Hagman. Am I satisfied? Yes, to a certain extent, as in we have recruited recently and we have a couple of people starting in this particular area. So I'm confident that we will now be able to move further into 2 of the recommendations. One of the recommendations, full voucher audit annually, we will never get to. And I am not concerned at not getting to that, because I believe our risk-based monitoring will satisfy us to that extent. The whole direction around about self-directed support is to increase the use of option 1s. So this area will increase. So we will have to constantly be looking at the balancing, making the budget, increasing the budget to match that. And also we will need savings going forward. We will need to get smarter. We will need to get more technology advanced in these areas to make it that much more. So this will not be a subject on social committee's horizon, because I have the resources to do this at this moment in time. I have vacancies and I've got recruitment ongoing at the moment, which will enable me to fill the areas that gives me satisfaction, that are never 100% secure in how we spend the funds, but gives us a fairly high level of assurance in that we allocate our money based on people's outcomes, and they spend it based on the outcomes that we have assessed.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, if I can just come back. I guess my other question, attached to that is, can we as a committee put on actions to the forward plan for other committees to take forward? So if we were to basically put forward a recommendation that we wished social work to take forward to monitor, do we have that within our gift as the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee? So that was my point there. And yeah, I mean, the point about the delivery of service, I think that's possibly a second point, and I'm really happy to explore that on item 6, which, Chair, you've already alluded to that on page 59. But yes, if I can just ask maybe a bit of governance advice back to Vlad, do we as a committee have the ability to put forward recommendations for the forward plan for other service committees? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Katie. I wouldn't have thought to personally, but I mean, it's for Vlad to answer. You're absolutely right. I think we can drill into this as much as we want as a committee, or this committee can do that as much as they want, this particular subject matter, if they think it's the appropriate thing to do. But to put the workload onto other committees, I don't know if that's the case. Vlad?
I think in terms of each committee will obviously have their own forward plans, and within that they'll have their own ways of scrutinising the services within them. However, I don't think there's a particular issue in terms of if Audit, Risk and Scrutiny want to recommend something, but ultimately it'll be for that committee to decide as to how they take that forward. So it might be encompassed already within the overall reporting for the various business plans and various services within that, and I think that's alluded to in that 3.8 in terms of how some of this has already been taken up by that service committee. But ultimately, if there's a recommendation flowing from this, that will be taken up through governance channels, and ultimately it'll be for that committee to decide how it takes that on in due course.
Thank you, Vlad. Are you okay with that, Katie?
Yep, thanks, Chair.
It's you next, Stephen. I didn't know if you can add to that as well, if possible.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I was looking at 3.8 and I think Sean's maybe sort of touched it a wee bit just in terms of going forward. I think my concern was really, and it's maybe going back to Jane's point about what level of monitoring are we confident we can achieve, and I suppose with regards to this, in what time period, because this is very conditional on filling those vacancies within the service. Now Sean's obviously confident that may happen, although maybe not 100%, etc. But it's no secret that we struggle to recruit and retain staff in certain sectors. So there is something about how much service can we deliver, or can our partners deliver through PAs or whatever, and how much can we monitor that, and what's an appropriate level that we can actually sustain, because maybe that's where we should focus as in this committee. I'm not sure, but just to make sure we've got best value, but we're proportionate as well, and we can actually continue that. So that's maybe sort of making a meal of the same point. And do we have contingency plans for if we don't recruit within, say, 3 to 6 months? I think within that paragraph it does talk about social work services, but that's not the same as social work services committee. So I appreciate Vlad's advice about the governance path. I took it that we would make recommendations to full council, and that would cascade appropriately as a committee. But within the audit exercise, there would be recommendations to management, and they would then take those on board or respond appropriately to fulfil those. So maybe that's a misunderstanding on my part. But I mean, I would certainly like to see how this pans out. You know, if we do recruit, how does that impact on what we do going forward? So I don't know if we have to capture that as part of this particular report, just to get that assurance that we are taking a proportionate amount of monitoring, given the resources that we have, based on the services we're able to deliver. So that was one thing. And the other thing was just on Councillor Young's point about family members being employed. I don't know if that's an issue or not, but it might be helpful to know what the proportion is of PAs who are family members, because clearly I would imagine we would know if they've had a conversation with senior staff in order to, you know, sort of ratify that arrangement, which is fair enough. Then that would surely be recorded somewhere. I shouldn't say surely. I would hope that would be recorded somewhere in the service users' notes, for example, so that staff are aware if that arrangement's in place. So I'm not sure if it's an issue or not, but I mean, it would be helpful if we could get a sense of the scale of that, because it may or may not be an issue. Do you know what I mean? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Sean, are you looking to come in there? I'll just watch. Yeah, maybe not. No, I thought you maybe wanted to come in there, Sean, were you? No, just by your movements. No, so I think we're heading towards a follow-up report, personally. That's what it feels like to me. And that, I think that the level of statistics that you're talking about in regards to Councillor Young's point, I think that's if that's required for the next report, that's absolutely right. I think a scrutiny review gets referred to full council, if I'm correct. A scrutiny review gets referred to full council, but ultimately this would, I don't know if you want to come in and that, Vlad, that particular point that Stephen brought up. I think if we do a scrutiny review, that goes to full council, but in this type of report, I think it's for ourselves to try and bottom up, but I forget the exact, would that be referred directly to Social Work Committee itself if we did have a particular findings, but we wanted them to undertake? No, okay, we'll keep going with Councillor Driver next. Oh no, sorry, sorry, Vlad, you're coming in.
Yeah, just to confirm, in terms of the delegations, they're quite clear in terms of to make recommendations to the council arising from the outcome of scrutiny process, not this particular internal audit process. So, in essence, it would be an unusual scenario, but I can't see why one committee can't recommend something and ultimately it'll be looked at. But I do agree that, to me, a follow-up report would be the tidiest thing here in terms of bringing it back to here in terms of making sure that that's been delivered in the way that you wish for it to be delivered, and then you can at that point decide what steps, if any, more need to be taken rather than trying to recommend it for another committee. But ultimately I would expect this sort of activity and service provision to be scrutinised through the relevant service committee, and that's part of the delegations to that particular committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Stephen looks content with that. Archie, then we'll draw this to a conclusion and get to recommendations. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And it was on that particular point that Vlad was actually discussing there. It's on this particular report on the audit report on direct payment prepaid cards, whilst all the other discussion that's going on about social services are important to discuss later on. I think from the recommendation point of view, as Sean had said earlier on, they're in the process of employing more staff. They're looking at these things to monitor them more appropriately. I think with regards to recommendation 2.2, it would be appropriate in a year's time to bring this report back. I think the other things that you discussed could be on a later report, as you have suggested yourself, Chair.
Good, thank you very much for that, Archie. Thanks for your contribution. So 2.1 is to note the progress made by the management in addressing the internal audit of prepaid cards alongside adherence to the coronavirus COVID-19 in brackets guidance. And 2.2 is to decide if a follow-up report on the outstanding actions is required. But so I'll come back very, very briefly, if you don't mind. Jock, you were covered. Councillor Young. I'm just got Councillor Young, Councillor Maitland. It's Willie, then Katie. I think maybe you had some points, but I'm not just so sure. Stephen, and I think Archie, you didn't have. No, Stephen's fine. So, in particular, John, do you want to just come back and as far as a future report? Yep.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak again. It's the monitoring aspect I'm concerned with. We've got a budget of 7.3 million. We're spending about 1.5% of that on monitoring that spend. I would like to see a more structured way of monitoring that spend and ask that be part of the report of a detailed account rather than just informal questions. It's a big council spend and we really need to make sure we're spending it appropriately. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Jane, do you want to come back and add your comments?
Now, I think when I heard the officer suggest it was going to be 4 members of staff, but who will be employed doing other things as well, I'm sure. This isn't a full activity that they will take place. I'm actually really reasonably satisfied through the debate and through what members have been asking that we've covered the issue that the control issues identified by internal audit have been appropriately addressed by management, with the assurance that that they will have the staff in place in order to make certain that we go back to a proper monitoring situation. I mean, I think that's all we need to find out. frankly, in any future report. I don't. I think the rest of what people have been talking about is probably out with the substance of this particular report. So I'm reasonably satisfied.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Willie?
Yeah, just as been advised under 2.2, Chair, and it's a following report to find what steps are being taken to address the 3,500 unmet needs, 3,500 hours of unmet needs. You know, again, reflecting the crisis that's been identified throughout the whole of Scotland. We need to see how we are addressing the crisis in Dumfries and Galloway. Notwithstanding, and we've heard the reports, there's been recruitment drives and everything else, but we need to know, what other steps are being taken to address these, not only in SDS, but other issues as well.
Thanks for that, Willie. Will, would you be happy for that to be, because it's like its own agenda item, if that's all right, under paragraph 2.3 on page 59, item number 6? If that's all right, because then you'll get that particular subject matter. When it'll not get tied up. I think it goes beyond. It's a bigger subject matter than the payment cards we're looking at. Stephen, I know you see you're not wanting to come back in, but you were specific about statistics in regards to. So I just wonder if you want that included within the report.
I think for any report coming back, it would be helpful just to get a sense of the detail. I think it's a large service area. There's a lot of money gets spent. I think it would be helpful just to get a more structured breakdown of how it's monitored, etc. And if the family member issue, or if the family member side of that is a subject of interest, if you like, it might be helpful just to get a note of that, given that we have to make special arrangements to put that in place. So yeah, that'd be helpful. Also, the recruitment. I'd love to be confident that we can recruit and retain, but it is a challenge, and I think we've heard that in a number of committees and a number of different forums across the region. It may not be specific to this report, but it is one of the recommendations that we're trying to, in the process of addressing, so it would be helpful to get a follow-up on that as well. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think, Claire, you'll have captured that in as far as No, excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. So, Sean, just to make sure before we go off, nothing else you want to add in regards to what's been said?
No, thank you. Just thanks for the comments.
Thank you, Sean, for your contribution today. The other members in the room, I don't see anybody else in the chat. So item number 5 we're heading to now, which is risk management of the major capital projects. This is the report by Head of Governance and Assurance. As far as I'm aware, we've got Paul McCulloch and Stephen Herriot here to assist members. So Paul, Stephen, the same process as before. I don't see you online yet. Oh, do I see you, Stephen? Don't see Paul online. Oh, there you go. I see you now. Does one of you want to lead in this? You want to say anything up front, or you just happen to take questions? I'll take your lead in this.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to go through the presentation with yourself and members. Just to let you know that, as you know, Stephen and his team, and also Karen Scott's joining us from a procurement perspective. So what I'd like to do, if I can, through you, Chair, is share my screen, and we'll run through the presentation itself. So we're here today to talk about the strategic risk that is the delivery of major capital projects through the council. Can everyone see that screen okay?
We can see it. Right, okay, we see it in the room as well.
Yeah. So why, I suppose, the first question is, why is it a strategic risk? Obviously, to deliver our major capital projects, time, cost and quality is how they're measured. And as a council, we need to ensure that our plans and programmes are well thought through and well executed. Good programme and project management increases the likelihood that the investment we make is well directed and delivered to the 3 parameters, but also provides the intended benefits that we set out. And obviously, as we're aware of, failure is a significant risk. So obviously, as we look to deliver our capital programmes, there are various influencing factors across the way that capital programmes are delivered. So it helps achieve our local outcomes, and it improves the overall efficiency of our public sector estate, and can indeed reduce revenue costs over the longer term. It's also quite crucial that our capital spending plans support and build the local economy. So there's a lot of local, small, medium-sized enterprises that rely on our capital spend, and we support the local economy through that. So poor planning and obviously lack of accountability and leadership can undermine the investment. And if we don't deliver, we can suffer from reputational damage. There can be negative financial impacts, and obviously it affects our ability to deliver services to our communities. And it's probably worth saying at that stage that through this period of COVID, we have faced some quite significant challenges across the construction sector, and those are probably well reported. It's not just this council, but probably every public sector body across the UK that's suffering from some of the things that I'll come on to talk about. But in terms of existing controls, our council moved to a position where we created a project management office to act as a centralised and coordinating resource to provide that centre of expertise for construction project management. And as we've moved forward, we've sought to strengthen that PMO resource, and I'll come on to talk about that. So we now have project boards set up for all major construction projects. Now, those project board setups follow the Scottish Government's capital investment manual guidance regarding their structures, their governance and their reporting arrangements. So a good example of that's probably the DLT2 project board that has been set up as part of that major capital project or projects. So we have a project board set up, we have all of the necessary governance arrangements and reporting arrangements in place, but quite critically for that project board, responsibilities have been clarified from the outset. We mentioned quality, and construction quality obviously is paramount in terms of delivery, because from construction quality you get safety, and safety's first and foremost in not just my mind, but everyone's mind with regards to people being in and around their buildings. So what we did through that revamp of the project management office, that restructure, we increased the Clerk of Works resource and gave the PMO dedicated Clerk of Works resource to ensure that construction quality was being achieved. So that was quite a big step forward and positively. In terms of the existing controls that we use, so we utilise the Treasury Green Book in terms of that overall governance. The Scottish Government's capital investment manual guidance is followed and embedded within our systems and processes. We also follow the Scottish Government's construction procurement handbook guidance. A good example of that recently is the agreement of the contract strategy for the new Dumfries High School. That work, along with colleagues from legal and procurement, to a position whereby we had a signed off contract strategy for the way we're taking that forward, and that sort of tripartite working arrangement, colleagues from education, colleagues from procurement, colleagues from property, and also legal input was critical there. And our project management systems that we have are embedded within the system we use, which is PMIS. So if I talk about things like risk and risk recording and risk mitigation, that's all documented and recorded. We have robust cost management procedures in place to ensure that we manage the budgets properly. We have robust programming of the projects to ensure that we deliver to time. And I'll come on to talk about a couple of problems we've had with that recently. And then there's the contract management side. So we now have contracts for all of our construction projects over 50k, and all of that work that was done through procurement and legal to get us to that position has stood us in good stead with that. So in terms of budgeting, we obviously use the Green Book. In terms of business case process, we utilise the Scottish Government's Capital Investment Manual 5-case model. In a business case, we've standardised the way we'll look at that. So we'll look at the strategic case, the economic case, the commercial case, the financial case and the management case, and all that's fully clarified within that business case process. And then in terms of business case process, we move through from, I suppose, initial agreement to outline business case and full business case. Good example of that recently is probably the work ongoing around about Stranraer Marina. So the folks there developing that business case are following that model through the Capital Investment Manual. Initial budget estimating, again, we're using optimism bias as a recommended tool through the Treasury Green Book to look to lift our initial budget estimating, and we also use the BCIS system to include inflation. What we're finding previously was that some of the sort of budget estimates, by the time we got round to undertaking the project, were out of date. So we'll try to sort of future-proof that in order that as members take decisions on capital projects, we're not going to come back all the time and ask for further funds. So looking at when the project will commence and looking at the time scale that will elapse between, I suppose, initial budget estimating and perhaps member approval to then get into construction. So that's something we do. And obviously, with regards to the external funding side of things, we're looking to include optimism bias there as well, because sometimes there are funding parameters set by external organisations. Again, it's key that we get the optimism bias in there. So, inflation, a big issue at the moment. Obviously, materials cost in particular is causing problems across the sector, both construction inflation and availability. So what we've found through the Scottish Heads of Property Group, that across Scotland some bidders for contracts are now asking for price fluctuation clauses to be included in tenders. Now, as a council, we've not taken a decision on whether we utilise or not the price fluctuation clause that we've got available. Certainly, looking at another issue being, if a tender's held open for 90 days, some of the contractors that are bidding with other local authorities are saying, I can only hold this price open for 30 days because if I don't order the materials, I might go back and they'll be far more expensive. So again, we need to look at that, and we need to look at our level of optimism bias in the budget estimating to ensure that we've got that inflation included for. And there's also work ongoing with procurement colleagues regarding the tender processes and how we can perhaps shorten the turnaround from tender return to tender award. Another issue is contractor availability at the moment. And what we're finding again through the Scottish Heads of Property Group, there's a real lack of contractors willing to price for work, and a lot of that's probably to do with the amount of pent-up demand through various lockdowns, and they're now having to do the work that was planned for those periods. So there is a lack of contractors. An example of that recently is probably the Stranraer Museum project. So we'll put that project out to tender twice. And we've been unsuccessful in both occasions to actually appoint a contractor. Now, obviously, we're working with colleagues in economic development and in procurement to look at how we can further advertise, further engage with the sort of contractor supply chain to get to a position whereby we can get someone to do the work. So some of the actions that we're taking in this regard, supply chain engagement being worked up for early 22 with procurement colleagues. So what we're looking to do is to engage with our local supply chains regarding how we do business, regarding the council's capital plan and the fact that it is a plan that goes forward in perpetuity. We're looking to build relationships with local SMEs, because remember, what we used to do was we had an in-house construction arm. We don't have that anymore, so we're going straight to the market. So we changed the way we did business, but we changed it, and then along came COVID. So we've really been sort of up against it in terms of delivering our sort of capital programme. We're looking to also have meet the buyer events again with SMEs who can support the council in delivery of the capital programmes. And we're also going to work with our procurement colleagues to develop a refreshed main contractor framework. That's something that we will be progressing with very soon. We talked about materials availability, and again, that's something that is impacting on our programmes, in particular when we get to site. So obviously we're engaging early with contractors to identify problem materials. We're seeking to see whether there can be agreements regarding advance ordering and storage of materials and payments for such being explored. So if we know perhaps a particular issue with fire doors, if there's a lot of fire doors, let's get them ordered early, let's get them paid for, let's get the contractor paid, and let's get them stored somewhere that the council can take ownership of them. So, and also our tender allowances for time and cost compared to current prime costs and lead times. So again, just looking at our programmes to see whether they're actually achievable in the current market conditions. And lastly, I talk here about the project management running at 50% capacity due to staff vacancies. I also know that procurement colleagues are having difficulty with the recruitment of staff. From a PMO perspective, I'm pleased to say that we've managed to make some key appointments, and we've managed to recruit suitably experienced, qualified and skilled staff into the PMO. Obviously, we're working with human resources colleagues to secure the additional staff. And we have advertised widely using all media types to sort of get to a position whereby we get the right staff in. So that's me, Chair, with regards to the presentation. Stephen, Harriet, I don't know if you want to add anything to that at this stage.
Chair, if it's okay with you, I can talk a bit about the infrastructure side of things in relation to what Paul said, if that would be agreeable to committee.
Yeah, well, Stephen, just carry on.
Thank you, Chair. So a lot of what Paul said out in the presentation on the kind of property side covers a lot of the issues and the risk management for capital projects within the infrastructure side. But I'd maybe just highlight a few kind of issues that we have specifically, and that might help committee just kind of understand our risk management. The service vision for roads and infrastructure is very much aligned with delivering the Council's economic development, sustainable development, climate change strategies. And for roads and infrastructure, the outcome of that is really that we deliver a large number of projects on the capital side within our maintenance programmes, and a smaller number of major capital projects. A lot of our project management resource on our major projects sits within our engineering design team and our flood risk management team in terms of delivering significant projects. Paul mentioned the kind of issues around recruitment, and that's certainly something we are experiencing within our flood risk management team as an issue in our risk, and also our engineering design team working on projects and design and contract management and project management management, and we're working and looking at the kind of technical services agency framework with procurement colleagues, and using that to, on an interim basis, plug some of the vacancies that we have, as well as working with HR colleagues on a wider exposure on our recruitment campaigns. What I would also say in terms of delivering the Council's economic development strategy, with the position with a lot of funding coming through Borderlands, the members will be cited on the Levelling Up Fund and the Strategic Transport Projects Review through Transport Scotland, the Union Connectivity Review from UK Government. There does, we are at a time where there's a lot of opportunity, potential for future capital investment in the region, and I think as Paul and my own teams, look at their resources and their capacity, we probably have a need to look to the future about where we might be involved in the delivery of some of that significant investment, either as client project managers, as the intelligent client function, or actually delivered and more on the kind of design and delivery side of some of these projects. Within our capital programmes, within roads and infrastructure projects, over 250,000 are reported separately within the public realm asset class projects to committee, and our major projects are usually reported on an individual basis, specifically to committee or subcommittee in terms of the waste subcommittee. And Paul mentioned the kind of time, cost, quality balance in terms of what we're trying to achieve in our capital project programme delivery, and these kind of interplay off each other. And if we can lead on, we can do something quickly, cost goes up and quality might go down. So it's about that balance as designers, as project leads, in terms of the time, cost, quality balance. But we're also, and as Paul mentioned, align those with safety and for very much about the CDM, the construction design and management regs, which are embedded in our project management approach. Specifically for infrastructure, some of the contract documentation Paul mentioned, we actually use the NEC 3 contract through the Institution of Civil Engineers documentation, and the supervisory role in that is key in terms of project quality. Our project managers have training in Prince 2, NEC 3 contracts and the CDM regs from a kind of health and safety point of view. And these project management practices have been developed by involvement, particularly with our engineering manager, who couldn't be at committee this morning, in the past on the project management group and the building safety group, to develop some of the work around quality in some of our construction projects. In terms of kind of cost control, we make use of external quantity surveyor resource on more complex infrastructure projects, and that supports the kind of contractual finances where we have external parties involved, but also in arriving at works cost estimates with the appropriate optimism bias and the likes of our flood projects where we have major projects. Paul also mentioned the kind of the conditions, and certainly within roads and infrastructure, we're seeing returns on some of our bridge tenders being significantly priced beyond our pre-tender estimates, and in some of our materials on roads works and materials on maintenance for surfacing contracts, we're seeing back analysis in the past year of about 8 to 12% increase in inflation costs. What we're also finding is locally and region resource contractor availability and willingness to price has been impacted, and that we need to just consider how we engage with local contractors to make sure that they're positioned to be able to bid for work going forward. Part of that has involved in us having to rebase costs, prices within our maintenance frameworks, recognising the cost increases, the inflationary effects of materials costs. And we're also experiencing in some projects longer lead times on sourcing of materials. We apply, as I said, the optimism bias approach to our flood risk management projects, particularly. Paul was talking about the Treasury Green Book guidance. We run to a different kind of government-approved process in terms of assessing our flood schemes through the local flood risk management plan ranked on a region basis, and through the national flood risk assessment ranked on a national basis. And there's a separate or the business case development of our flood risk management schemes to demonstrate a positive benefit cost ratio to achieve support from Scottish Government in funding. And again, one of the challenges there is, as well as applying appropriate optimism bias for the management of scheme costs, is how we manage project scope creep and the extension of projects to cover a wider area that can be protected from flood risk as design develops, and we demonstrate benefit cost ratio as positive in a wider area than we were originally looking at. So that's always a bit of a challenge, I think, particularly with the flood projects, is aligning back to the original project scope and maintaining that. I think what we're also finding, I think from my service in roads and infrastructure particularly, a lot of public realm works has a big impact on our communities in terms of businesses, in terms of residential properties proximity, and there's a lot of interest in that, and we spend a significant amount of time in consultation and engagement with communities who have particular concerns with we're proposing by way of change in the public realm. I think we invest a lot of time in that, and we apply good practice and consultation as developed within the council, but we do still face some challenging situations where schemes are not accepted by some elements of the communities, and there's still a lot of work to be done in selling the benefits, the wider benefits of some of these improvement schemes in the public realm. So that's just, Chair, just a bit of an oversight of and hopefully building on for Roads and Infrastructure Service the approach to risk management on our strategic projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, Paul. Thanks very much. Sorry, was somebody coming in there? No, thanks very much. There were two very useful presentations. I know it's contained within there, but you've certainly put the meat on the bones, so to speak, in regards to additionality. I don't see any members looking to come in at this moment in time. Nobody in the room's looking to come in. I suppose the points that I'd put down, you probably touched on. The only one I'd like to see more, Councillor Thompson's want to come in. I'll leave mine to the end. So Councillor Thompson, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. It was actually on one of the elements of the, I suppose, potential risks. So this would be around, you mentioned the DLT2 project, and obviously that's a significant project, going to take a long time, and there's a lot of focus maybe on the sort of programme board, if you like, the sort of relevant cross-council messaging, and also what I'm not really seeing as much of is the sort of displacement element of it. So this is a project, obviously, it's sort of captured the interest of a lot of communities and people in the town because it's sort of relevant, and it's been much needed in terms of the development of Dumfries High. But the question was, we heard about this at Education Committee last week as well, and I think we need to maybe do a bit of work on our messaging, because I think the programme board might include members from education and maybe facilities management, where there's a sports service running there, which their input would be welcome, because that part of the estate, obviously the programme will involve building somewhere on that site. But we heard at education that those services wouldn't be affected until the demolition phase in 2026. However, subsequently another member of the council has informed me that that something would have to give, because there's only so much space in the site, so it could be that the athletics track gets done or the bit behind the existing school. So 3 into 2 doesn't go, sort of thing. So I'm just concerned about the consistency of messaging. So if education says one thing and another team says another thing, I'm just sort of wondering, what would the answer be today if I were to ask, will the facilities remain in place until 2026? And then I can compare the two recordings and decide which one to tell the public who've asked me to feed back. Do you know what I mean? So it's maybe, because it does talk about existing internal controls, and there's a project management office structure in place with members from education, etc., would be in that. So surely everybody's on the same page, or is this something we need to bottom out just to get that clear message to communities? Because that in turn affects how we consult with communities, and if members of the communities are getting different messages from different departments, it doesn't help our cause in terms of managing that, and will take more resource to sort of ameliorate that. So I'd welcome a wee bit of clarity on that. Thank you.
Just whoever thinks it's most appropriate to answer it will be guided by yourselves.
Yep. Thanks, Chair. Through you, I see fortuitously Lauren's here in the call. So, Lauren, can I pass that one over to you? Obviously, you attended the last Education Committee.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Councillor Thompson, for your question. I think when it was asked at Education Committee, the response, well, the question was directly around the building itself. The school and the David Keswick Centre will categorically remain in place until the project is finished. So in terms of the built facility, it will be available for the school and for external use through the Greyston Foundation after that. However, the external sports facilities, absolutely, that's the decision. It's either built to the rear of the school or to the front of the school, and depending which option is taken, that will have an impact on the facilities externally that are left available. And I think it was one of my team that had responded to that same messaging, hopefully. Now, if that isn't clear, happy to work with my colleagues to ensure that you have that distilled to something that is appropriate to share with the communities. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Lan. Yeah, I think the question was asked a couple of different ways at the committee on Thursday, just to get to the bottom of that. But I think it's really the athletics track and that user group there who would really welcome that clarity. But I appreciate you helping with that, and I'll maybe catch up with you after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. We have 4 other speakers: Councillor McKee, Driver, Young and Campbell. So, Jock, it's over to you first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for the presentation. It was very interesting and it answered a lot of questions. I suppose my big question is, given what the Council's been through in the recent past with large projects, we've had a lot of, put it down to bad luck if you like, but are you comfortable that the project board that we've got set up and the people, the membership of it and all that are capable and will be able to fulfil all the needs when we're getting major projects done? Thank you.
Thanks, and through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor McKee. So, to answer your question, yes. What we have done is, and quite rightly so, is taken full cognizance of the call report into the Edinburgh schools, the call report into DG1, and also the North West Campus root cause analysis report. So all of the issues that have been identified as part of each of these 3 reports, as well as learning experience from across Scotland, have been of Dumfries High School. So to answer your question, I also sit on a group led by the Scottish Government looking at construction quality across Scotland, because it's not just this council that have fell foul of construction quality. Construction quality is a real issue in the construction sector at the moment, and it's something that the Scottish Government are looking at quite, they're looking at this in great detail. So I'm confident that as we go forward into this new project that we will get this right. What I can also say is that the project management lead that's recently been appointed to deliver this new school has joined us from West Lothian Council, where he's been delivering schools for a significant number of years. So we've got someone in working with us who came from that environment.
Have you had a look at his schools, have you? Thanks very much. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Driver next.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. It's just coming back to one of the issues that we hear time and time again is about rising cost of supplies and things like that. And obviously that has an impact on how the projects are being managed. But my understanding through procurement is that certain levels of management have the opportunity to say, we need this bit of extra spend here to keep the projects on time as much as possible. Now, I understand what you're saying, Paul, about, the situation is it could be so exacerbated by the price of the supplies that there's we have to go through yet another process of procurement and things like that. And obviously, one of their concerns is some of the contractors may not apply for that contract, knowing full well there'll be a substantial increase in the cost of supplies. So it's how do we manage that opportunity more than say it's a barrier to suggest that those with a certain rank within the structure of Dumfries and Galloway Council have the opportunity to raise that spend so that the projects can actually stay on time.
So I'll perhaps answer that, and then I'll bring Karen in. So as you know, we have a degree of delegated authority to increase project costs. Obviously, that's limited. However, I think one of the issues that we've had around about pre-tender estimate versus tender return, and we've discussed this before. So the inclusion of optimism bias and the use of BCIS for inflation has assisted us in that regard. And with regards to that flexibility, both Economy and Resources and Education and Learning have recently agreed to a degree of flexibility within the capital programmes. I'll pass across to Karen now.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Archie. I think for me there was probably two parts in your kind of question. There's the first part around that initial engagement and how do we make sure we've got contractors coming to the table, and obviously Paul in the presentation described some recent examples where we're really struggling with that. So as part of the APT review recommendations as well, we're bringing out a kind of series of engagement sessions with local contractors and local suppliers. Part of the agenda of that will be about understanding from them firsthand what are those challenges, what can we do differently to try and ensure that what we're putting out to the market is attractive enough to secure the engagement in the initial stages. What we then find is probably the second part of, I think your question was around how once we've got them on board, when they continue to get all these market changes happening and affecting them, what can we do to support them around that and have that flexibility whilst on site to continue with them without it being a case of this contract's becoming completely different, we need to take it back out to the market. So we're currently, again, as part of the FPT review recommendations, reviewing our contract supply management strategy and the policies within that. So part of that will bring about a proposal through FPT committee around how we ensure that there's appropriate flexibility, and we do need to ensure there is that appropriateness there. However, that needs to take cognizance of the fact of where we are today. Obviously, the current arrangements were written sort of 5 years ago, so I think as part of that we need to recognise the markets are in quite a different place. We've had some guidance come out from Scottish Government through some policy notes recently as well, which touch on this specifically within construction as well. So things that Paul mentioned earlier around building in price variation clauses, and we're now starting to have those conversations at officer level for specific contracts where we think actually we know there's a heavy reliance on materials, or we know that this is going to go on for a prolonged period of time. We perhaps need to think about where it may be appropriate to include things like that. Or again, some of the examples we've had on the road side that Stephen referred to earlier as well. We're having contractors who are going on site and the material costs have then gone up so significantly that they're not able to fulfil the works within an affordable range. So what we've done there is utilise some of the existing NEC3 clause contract conditions to actually negotiate with them, and through our existing delegations we've been able to support that to allow for two of the significant pieces of work in each side of the region, whereby we had contractors on site who were no longer able to source materials at the agreed rates. We've used the mechanisms within the existing contractual documents to enable them to either revise the materials that they're using or increase the costs to accommodate that. And obviously we go through the evidence base and things as well to back all of that up through the existing contract conditions. But there's some things that we've been doing and it's been recognised at a national level through those policy notes that have been coming out. So I think some of those updates of our policies will also start around contract supplier management, will also support us some way in terms of just making sure that we take cognizance of that and have a degree of flexibility where it's appropriate to have that.
So if I could just come back in, Chair, and you know, just to get to the other end of that, where contractors are being paid from the council, and obviously we're trying to get the payment out as quickly as possible to those contractors, because we don't want to be seen as a bad person to work for at the end of the day. I noticed in the past there's been an improvement in making sure that those contractors that we have contracts with are getting their due amount within a certain amount of days. Are we sort of reviewing that as well?
Yeah, again, through yourself, Chair. We have continued to make some really significant improvements around that. We've obviously had the Council's Purchase to Pay project, which has been a kind of ongoing project. Just some of the changes and things that happened around COVID over the last couple of years has created a bit of a diversion around closing that off. So that is part of our focus at the moment. And certainly by the end of this financial year, we aim to close that project down, which will also pick up on some of the roads and infrastructure and construction property orders that have been currently sitting out with, so we can ensure that those ambitions, and so we've been making sure that everyone's paid within the 30-day window, and where possible we do so quicker, and we're able to start to track and monitor where we're actually able to undertake that quicker. As part of that as well, obviously we had plans around having some form of early payment programme. I think as part of the recovery plans and agendas, then that will be a sort of no cost thing, and that will come back through the relevant committees. So but certainly that would be my recommendation around that, is that we look to just build that in as part of the recovery agenda as well. So absolutely that's seen a continued improvement. Anecdotal evidence again through contracted discussions suggests that there has been an improvement around that, but I think closure and final conclusion of that P2P project will also support us just on any remaining outstanding areas.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Young, then Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Dumfries and Galloway Council's lease of Cargan Tower comes to an end in 7 years' time, and I'm wondering if the removal of our facilities and resources has started to be planned for, because quite a major chunk of the council's operations presently reside at Cargan Tower. And secondly, if you'll bear with me, I'm sure under a spend to save scheme it was mooted at one time that a solar array would be constructed at Locher Moss to provide electricity to the recycling centre there. Are these plans still in place, or has that been dropped?
Through you, Chair, I'll answer the first one and pass the second one across to Stephen, if that's okay. So the question regarding Cargan Tower. Cargan Tower features in our office accommodation plan. What we've been able to demonstrate through the work that we did and the plan that members approved is that we don't need, or we won't need in the future, accommodation at Cargan. However, as Councillor Young has identified, there is a significant amount of other infrastructure out here. So work will begin perhaps next financial year to look at I suppose it's a bit of it's a business case as I've identified through the presentation. So we need to look at the cost benefit analysis. There will be capital investment required should we manage to get the capital investment from the necessary budget. We could then look to build what we have here somewhere else, and we've been looking again with Stephen and his colleagues to see if we can retain free area on the zero waste park. So what we're giving ourselves is options. We've given ourselves options to see how we can take this forward. There will be a business case required. It will be a cost benefit analysis, but we certainly don't need the offices going forward. So I hope that answers your question. I'll pass the question of the solar array across to Stephen.
Thanks. And I'll bring in James McLeod for a bit of the detail on this, but we have been progressing with the feasibility study, looking at PV on the Locher Moss site, and that is a land use either to service energy for the Echo Deco or to connect to the grid. But I'll bring James in. There's kind of a bit of an update on that project. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Sorry, through yourself, Chair. Councillor Young, yes, as you're aware, we appointed a consultant last year to take a business case for the solar development. At the time, we discussed with Scottish Power the connection to the grid, because while the Ecodeco MBT uses a significant amount of power, there will be times, particularly weekends, but also during shutdown periods, when that facility wouldn't be working. So we were looking at the viability of connecting to the grid. In terms of detail, we looked at we're looking at two options for grid connections. One in Heath Hall, one at Kelwood Road in Dumfries. Clearly, the Kelwood Road one is a considerably more expensive route to go, passing under the bypass and the railway line. So the Kelwood, the road one would be probably not the most advantageous route to take. The challenge presently is that while our business case has been developed to a sort of 60-70% stage and is looking reasonably positive in terms of connection, the challenge we're facing with Scottish Power at the moment is that there is a long list of projects within Dumfries and Galloway looking for connections to the grid. So the capacity in the grid is not sufficient to take the 6 megawatts that we would be looking to produce at the facility that we're proposing at the Loch Moss. So we are looking to complete that business case. The one stage we need to do is put the formal application into Scottish Power, but the initial thoughts are that Scottish Power are looking to probably 2025 at the earliest that there would be capacity in the grid for a connection here. But the next stage for us, and what we would look to report back to members once we get feedback on that and through Communities Committee, would be the formal feedback from Scottish Power on that, what capacity is available at Heath Hall, and when the timings would be that we could connect in. But that would be a report to Communities Committee. But if there's anything further in specific, quite happy to take that offline.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, John. And I think any members kind of rope to ask any questions, but I think when officers are considering the answer that they give, they should be looking at recommendation 2.3 in particular, how it relates to that, which is absolutely the implications on the risk of the council activities. So we have Councillor Campbell, and we'll draw it to a close.
I was going to say good morning. It's now good afternoon, 1 minute past 12. Yes. It's to pick up on the point of the optimism bias. Both Karen and Paul have already touched on it with other members' concerns or questions. But what happens if you have a project that's has been deemed past several years ago? For example, the White Sands Public Realm and Flood Defence Scheme. That was approved before I even started in the council in 2017, and it's now progressing forward as far as I'm aware. But the optimism biased, I mean, surely the cost of that scheme that was mooted around about 2015, I believe, surely must be extremely more expensive now, considering all the expenses in materials, etc. So, say a similar scheme comes along and it takes several years, or say between 5 and 10 years, how do we fit in that optimism bias? Surely that's still a risk to the council. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, will I come back in? That seems White Sands has been mentioned. Is that okay?
Absolutely, Stephen. Yeah.
So the optimism bias, so that at a period in time there will be a scheme cost for a particular scheme, and then a percentage of that will be considered to be the risk or the optimism bias. So if it's an early design stage, we might be looking at 60% optimism bias, and as the detailed design develops and we reduce the risk on unknown, say ground conditions to a certain extent, we can reduce the optimism bias or the risk associated with the scheme. What will also happen through time is that the scheme cost, as you say, Councillor Campbell, if a cost was 2015, we will have to apply, if it's not built for another 10 years, we will have to apply construction inflation to get get an understanding of the new scheme cost, and then a percentage of that would be the optimism bias. So I think maybe the answer to the question is, and it kind of touches on what was said earlier about maybe tender prices coming back higher than pre-tender estimates or allowed for within the Council's capital investment strategy. I think for some of these schemes that do run over and have a long period of time in development for various reasons, there's probably regular reporting back to at least Service Committee and then FPT on what the current scheme costs are. And I think members need to consider, in terms of the portfolio, what they can invest in and within the capital investment strategy, whether that offers them best value or the value for money that they're looking for their investment. As scheme costs maybe increase in some of these projects with the passage of time, that there might be affordability issues. So I think the answer is regular reporting to Service Committee on at various stages, and whether that's once a tender's returned and it is different from a pre-tender estimate, or if a period of time has passed and we need to revisit the actual scheme cost plus the optimism bias on top of that.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, John. That was one of my questions, so I'll leave that there. The only thing I would say about that is, I would imagine, to using that as an example, since you brought it up, John, is it seems to be, you hear indicative figures in near a £45–50 million for a project of that kind of size and scale at this moment in time. Very, very difficult to build in an optimum bias that would cater for that, I would have thought. But we'll come back to it, I think, probably after me. Willie, you're next.
Very quick one, Chair, and it's just on page 56. Paul referred to it, supply chain meet the buyer events being planned for early 22, targeting local small and medium-sized enterprises, and who can support the Council in the delivery of our capital spending priorities. And it's around the head and the risk management on delivering major projects. Paul made reference to the Stranraer Museum that's been well outstanding and has gone out to tender on 2 different occasions with no success, nobody tendering for the work. Could the project board look at the possibility, recognising that we had an extensive workshop on SMEs and how they could provide, to look at this in terms of procurement and what could be negotiated contracts rather than going through the whole procurement? If that's something that we could look at in terms of delivering some of these major projects locally.
Paul or Karen, whoever needs to answer that.
Happy to take that one, if that's okay, Chair. Paul. I think to come in, first of all, Councillor Scobie, the supply chain sort of meet the buyer events, we're looking to have a programme of those held throughout the year. We had made some early plans to do that in January and February with events in both Dumfries and in Stranraer, but obviously just given the COVID restrictions that we came back to in the new year, meant that we did have to unfortunately postpone those events. So those larger events are now planned for the Dumfries and Stranraer. We're just making the arrangements at the moment to with the aim of hosting something in late June. We've also got a South of Scotland event that we're looking to host as well, which we've just firmed up on a date for the 4th of October. So I think these events are something that we'll look to do throughout the year, but we're also looking at having something specifically around construction and looking at how we engage construction suppliers specifically, either as a primary contractor or as some of the supply chain opportunities to come in as subcontractors as well, and how we can support that network. And so an event specifically around the Stranraer Museum was something that as a project board we came together last week and discussed as a possibility. So we're just starting to do some of that market engagement, which we anticipate may well lead to some form of facilitated networking event for suppliers, where primary contractors can then start to meet with potentials who might undertake some of the specialist works that are required there. But first of all, we're just trying to understand exactly what it is that has been putting suppliers off bidding for that one in the 2 times it went out to market last year. The negotiated procedure is also something that has been considered and discussed last week by the project board. But prior to us going down that route, we really just need to understand exactly what stopped anybody from bidding so far. Because one of our challenges around that is how do we fairly and in a transparent manner select the contractor that we would now negotiate with, given that nobody has really expressed some genuine interest in bidding so far. I think there was one contractor who made an attempt at a bid, but it was an incomplete submission, and that was a contractor that there with some question marks that would need to be fully explored in terms of their suitability, and that was a contractor from out with the region as well. So how they would engage the supply chain and what their subcontractors would look like was a fundamental area that we wish to explore. So it's not an option that's off the table, but I think first of all we need to just really have that discussion and dialogue with the market, both in terms of primary contractors and the suppliers that sit beneath that, to undertake some of the specialist elements for Stranraer Museum, and that work has begun already in the last week, to just try and better understand exactly what the challenges are for that particular scheme.
Yeah, I appreciate the comprehensive reply, but it was a simple, can we look at negotiated contracts along with SMEs and how we do that, moving away from procurement where it's right to do that?
I think if I heard that right, Karen, were you saying that subject to further due diligence, so you're looking at that further, that's the approach you may well be taking? But if you could put that in just as quick a summary of ways you could for Willie, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, absolutely, the negotiate procedure, because we've had 2 field tenders, is an option that we're considering, subject to appropriate due diligence for that particular job.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Don't have any other further speakers. I'll just check. That's the last comment in there. I've got some things. The only one thing, it's a wee bit to the side, but I do see it as being a risk. But maybe when we're looking at this particular scenario here, we're looking at these capital projects, we're beyond that point in time to a degree, but then you look back, reflect back in the White Sands, and it would affect this. But so some even larger SMEs within Dumfries and Galloway have been approaching me, and they're saying that permissions have been really stifling them, holding them up, and that's in the long-term projections going beyond this unit and next in the following. They're thinking serious about potentially getting rid of folk, paying them off or whatever it may be, because I'm talking about planning permissions in particular. So I'm just wondering, as far as from a risk point of view, is that something that, how much consideration do we take in regard? Nobody's touched on that at all. It's the only point I think I've got noted that nobody's touched on. So plan permission, and I'll use the White Sands as an example. It's retrospective, it's in the past, but I mean, it was a long time in which to get to that particular permission, and it's a wait for the council. But I am getting concerns raised from the private sector in particular to say, listen, because your processes are so slow, we're realistically looking at getting rid of people. Paul.
So I'll let Stephen answer the question regarding the White Sands in particular, but with regards to major capital projects or capital projects of any nature that we undertake, what we do as part of that programming, the project programming is build in the time required to secure the necessary consents. Now, remember, that might not just be planning permission. It could be building warrant, it could be SEPA consent, it can be roads consent. There could be all sorts of consents required. So as we look at our capital programme and as we look at the programme for delivery, we build in the required timeframes for securing the necessary consents. And then what we have is we have hold points within the process to ensure that we don't go a step too far without having the consents in place. So we've quite a rigorous process for that. I mean, obviously, delays with regards to sort of consents can become an issue for capital projects.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, it's okay about the White Sands. It would just to try and bring it into context, keep it away from anything currently that's going on, especially around about planning. But no, I'm quite content with that answer you've given us, Paul. So, and what I'm taking from that is the council in real terms. You've got that risk, you've got it assessed. I'm getting assurance that actually you do take it into consideration as part of your evaluation, how you go forward with capital projects and how they're presented to members. Fine, absolutely fine with that. Okay, so what we're looking at is 2.1, note the existing internal controls in place to manage the risk. We're looking to note at 2.2 the additional actions in place to manage the risk and consider whether these are sufficient. And 2.3, we're taking they are sufficient. I've not heard anybody say otherwise. I would like to see a higher level of members' involvement in regards to that. I think we sit too high away for some of these projects. We should be lower, taking the DG1 subcommittee into consideration. Historically, I think that could be another way forward, but I'm leaving that to the side. That's not what we're looking at specifically today. That's my own personal thoughts. And 2.3 is to consider the implications of risk on council activities. And I think we've done that vigorously. I really do appreciate the level of your presentations. I hope I haven't offended anybody with the last comments in regards to 2.3. It's just a matter of trying to focus minds because time's really drifting on now. But really interesting subject matter, I find it anyways, and I do appreciate your time that you put into that. Fascinating. Thank you. Thanks very much. Item number 6. That's our annual report of the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee for December 2020 to December 2021 and future actions. This is a report by Vlad. It looks like I've got Vlad and Fraser here to ask any particular members' questions. But before I go into, I'll just, again, the same routine and process I've used for everybody else. If there's anything do you want to present, do you want to just take members' questions? I'll be led by yourselves.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. In terms of what you've got there is the annual report of this committee and all the various actions and reports that have come to this particular committee, particularly bearing in mind the remit, which you'll see within the appendix on the left-hand side. We've got the remit, and then we've tried to match that with the relevant parts that refer to that particular remit. In terms of the 2.3, obviously what we're looking at is for members to consider any forward plans in regards to the work of this committee and obviously the officers in order to carry that out. Obviously in an earlier item we were discussing the possibility of the kind of care element of it and just reviewing the scheme of delegations and standing orders. I wouldn't feel comfortable about that, in particular as there's an exclusion that's purely for council to review the delivery of health and social care, and looking at that particular performance element of it does appear to fall fully on council rather than any of its service committees or audit, risk and scrutiny, and linked to that is obviously the relevant budgets, but my gut instinct on it, just looking at the scheme of delegations, reviewing the delivery of health and social care does appear to sit fully with council, and that's as a result of the scheme of delegations obviously delegating to the IJB, and therefore is the IJB that's delivering it, and the scrutiny of that falls on full council. So my advice would be that that's what it should be, rather than it coming to this particular Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. So it's just a point of clarification on that front. But in terms of the report you've got in front of you has for you to consider what has come to this committee and in essence forward plan for the next year.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Vlad. So I suppose we'll come to you at some point, Willie, with that, but I would imagine my thoughts after what Vlad said there, you could undertake a scrutiny review if you wanted to, and that would be referred to full council if you felt it important, but ultimately that would be part of the workload. I think that's probably your only route when it comes to that, by the sounds of it. So no doubt at the moment. So what we'll do, we'll take these recommendations one at a time. So, no, Councillor, just summarize, is that Councillor Hagman wanting to speak or not? Have I got that right?
Yes, please, Chair.
Go on, and Katie, I'll open up to you.
I'm not sure, was Archie looking to come in as well? I think Archie was before me.
Apologies, so he was. You're absolutely right. I thought Archie, because you were at the end of the tail ones, I thought that was the previous. Archie, you're first, Councillor Dryburgh.
It's all right, Chair, if you want to go through the recommendations, the process first, then I'll come back in later on if that's okay.
No, but I'll just got to briefly say then, I think it should consider 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 systematically, just to go through this actual agenda item. So Archie, come back to you first if you have any comments in regards to that, but if it's roundabout process, I'll nip to Katie.
No, it's fine. It's actually about Appendix 2, Chair, on the report, and I'm a bit concerned that there's only, but when you actually look at the report itself about, DGC position, there's only been 4 members actually that their responses have actually been put into the graphs. Other responses indicate a general level of satisfaction. So I'm wondering how many people that responded. There was only 4 that actually responded. If other responses have indicated a general level of satisfaction.
Who's got a detail? Fraser?
Yeah, sorry about that. So Councillor Dryburgh, 7 members responded in total. 4 responded in the quantitative sense in the scoring system, and 3 responded in narrative, and that's where so it's got that summary line detailing their feedback. So that's why there's only 4 appearing on the actual chart itself. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hagman. Thanks, Fraser.
Thank you, Chair. I think possibly for future reports on looking at that member satisfaction, it may be an option that the officer dealing with that perhaps goes round the political groups and arranges to come and speak to all the political groups, and that way we may get a better response, because I appreciate members sometimes get an extraordinary number of emails and sometimes things are missed, so I would just maybe add that suggestion. And it was in regards to recommendation 2.3 and further areas, so I'm happy to wait till you get to that point, or if you'd like me to come in now. There's various points that I wanted to bring up as for looking forward. So I'll be in your hands, Chair, if you want me to go ahead now, or just wait till you get to 2.3.
Thanks, Kate. We'll just go through 2.1, 2.2, and I'll bring you in first at 2.3. I don't think Councillor Thompson, you want to come in first?
Yeah, it was just a quick point on the survey, and I think there's maybe something could be considered about whether it's going around political groups or capturing the feedback in a different way. I think some of the questions didn't really lend themselves well to a numerical response, given that some of them were sort of yes, no, or invited maybe further comments. So I certainly interpreted in that way and was and engaged in an email conversation about it. But so there is maybe something about for going forward in order to maybe best reflect the views. There's, we can maybe refine the questionnaire a bit so that the answers that come back are meaningful, if you like, and can be presented in an easier way. But otherwise comfortable with that. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Thank you. Take that on board. So at 2.1, consider the work completed by this committee from December 2020 to December 2021. Anybody got any particular points? That's referenced in Appendix 1. It's already been spoken to. Any particular points anybody wants to pick up on that? Then that's pages 63 through to 65. Recommendation 2.2 is to consider the committee members' assessment, which we've just discussed there in regards to Appendix 2. So we've got notes, we've got comments here that have been noted. I think Fraser and Vlad have both picked up on them. So we're right to the workload at 2.3. I don't see anybody coming in. So Katie, you're in first with this one. 2.3, you've got a number of pieces of work. Then Wally, obviously, will pick up on your point.
Thank you, Chair. So you'd picked up on actually the one of the points I wanted to raise. Sorry, I'm getting an awful lot of feedback. No. Oh, there we are. That's better. So yeah, and the first point I was going to raise was actually in relation to planning, and you had made reference to that in the previous item. And I'm just conscious that we, as a local authority, we're going, ahead with the local development plan, and I'm just wondering whether it would be appropriate for us to look at where we are and all those risks within planning, and even whether we want to do a piece of work where we're following through a planning application, just to ensure where all the checks and balances are being taken place, and get some experience back from those people that have actually used the service. So that was my first suggestion that I was going to raise. And then the other potential areas that I would like to maybe put to the committee for discussion is around within education. So the first one is in regards to additional needs, and I know there's been an awful lot of talk about autism support, but I personally seem to get an awful lot of casework around parents who are concerned that the children might be dyslexic. And I'm aware that there's checks and balances and processes that go through, and we engage with Call Scotland, but I've never actually had a report back saying this is the journey that people go through. And I'm not aware how much do we as a local authority spend with Call Scotland, how many referrals get through to Call Scotland, and how do people go through. So I think there is a piece of work that should be done. And also I'm aware that there was issues, especially in the pandemic, about maybe some of our young people who are deaf and maybe needed equipment and weren't necessarily always able to get equipment, and what are the risks for those. So that was my second point. The third one was around school transport, and the question that I had, and again, it is about risk and the scrutiny of the provision that we offer. I'm aware that we have a school transport entitlement scheme, and that has gone through committee. But where there are no safer routes to school and children are expected to walk or use active travel to get to school, but there may not be any pavements or cycle routes, what is the risk in those, and how do we as a local authority mitigate that for our young people to ensure that all children can get to school in a safe way? Because by the very nature of Dumfries and Galloway, we have a huge area to cover, and there are occasions, especially when we've got lots of children who maybe stay on farms, etc., where they're out with those boundaries, but there's no safe routes to school. What are the risks, etc.? So those are the sort of 3 points that I wanted to raise for discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I think so. Claire's got a note of them as well for the minute for the absolute record, and we'll just reflect on it at the very end to make sure that all that's captured. Just on one point before we move on, see when you talk about planning, could you just, so I'm clear in my own mind, because you spoke about both the local development plan, which is strategic planning, is my understanding, and you spoke about, I think, the planning application process, which is development planning. Have I captured that correctly? Or development control is two language.
So I think it's up for debate, Chair, and I think, I'm sure I'm not alone and you made reference to it yourself, where maybe people have got in contact because they're frustrated that things are maybe not going as quickly. And I just want to make sure that, as we move forward with the local development plan, and we look forward to the future and making Dumfries and Galloway, a really vibrant, great place for people to want to come invest, that all our planning controls are actually doing and going through as they should. I don't sit on planning, and I'm aware planning committee, obviously sit and they get planning reports. But in terms of the structure of our planning department, I think there may be a bit of work there. But I would put it to the committee first, all to maybe just come in, because that appreciate this is only one experience of myself that I'm bringing forward. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Kate. So what I'm taking for that, Claire, is it's development plan and stroke control, and it's the applications, the process, rather than the local development plan, which is, I think, would probably be inappropriate for here, because that's about the policy, so on and so forth, and it's such a lot of debate. And there's a workshop, I think, tomorrow in regards to that too, with some, I think, rather important updates. I will certainly promote that meeting to the members here and further around the council, because there's some material changes happening with the local development plan process over the next couple of years. But I just came aware of it. Willie, then we've got Councillor Maitland and then Councillor Young. Willie? Yeah, without rehearsing and going over what I've already discussed in the other item, it's really just to look at what the steps are that are being taken to address the care crisis and the 3,500 hours of unmet care needs, particularly in respect of the risk to service users. Thank you. So capture that would be by the way of a scrutiny review to come back. So that again, I would imagine what will happen with this will come back to a report of this or its successor committee after May at some point, and they would then prioritise that. So okay, we'll have that, we wouldn't have that, whatever it may be, right. Whether it be an internal review or whether it be the committee undertaking a scrutiny review itself. Okay, we have Councillor Maitland. Jane.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to take members back to 3.6 and the first bullet point, if I could. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, it's suddenly gone completely quiet.
Loud and clear, Jane.
All right, thanks. The issue is that whether or not the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee should consider how risk-based discussions have been encouraged across the council. Now, I'm not certain that we've absolutely grasped that particular nettle, because the issues that our members have been talking about, Katie's talking about planning, school transport and autism, these are all service issues which ought to be covered by the service committees. And And what we've, I think, got to be absolutely sure in our minds that these service committees, both officers and members, have the tools at their disposal to do the proper work, which then should mitigate the risks to the services. So I like a little bit, I think, probably of governance advice as to exactly what the remit of this committee is in respect to these particular issues that members are raising. All perfectly valid, but it's a question of how they're tackled.
I think that's for you, Vlad.
Yes, thank you through you, Chair. I think it's a very valid question in terms of how we tackle some of these subjects, and we have to absolutely consider this committee's delegations first and foremost, and thereafter whether some of those fall within other delegations to other committees and therefore are restricted to that. So we need to, I guess what we're looking at is a menu such that you would put forward areas for us to further consider. We would consider those and look at any governance issues within those subjects, and I've alluded to one earlier, and thereafter we would provide that advice to the committee in terms of the forward planning. In terms of the risk element, if I could also just bring that to the attention of the committee, that in terms of how we're tackling risk, you will see and you'll have evidenced this in terms of the deep dive that we had earlier in terms of that major project presentation, and that's the forthcoming plan that we have that's been agreed by this committee in terms of having more of those deep dives. That particularly obviously focuses on our council-wide risks. And we are doing quite a piece of work in terms of the more service level risks, and we're working with the relevant services in that regard. So we are definitely in an improvement journey in terms of that risk assessment and thereafter reporting, and I would hope that you're satisfied with what we've got in place for that reporting of the deep dives and the ability of this committee to actually have that further conversation with officers who are leading on that.
Thank you, Vlad. Jane, are you comfortable with that answer?
Yes, absolutely, Pro Tem. I'll have to think about whether or not what we have just done today was totally satisfactory or not. I think we should maybe reflect on that. But yes, that's absolutely fine for the time being.
I suppose what I'm very conscious of is, so in terms of reference stroke delegations is on the back of the frontis, but this is the workload. That's why I'm not going to have any comments in regards to this at all. This workload is for the next opposition, whoever that may be, after the council elections, and really it's for them to either, the council can change the terms of reference stroke delegation completely. They have a complete rewrite. It could be all brand new members on this committee, subject to they can look at them and think, okay, what do any of them have a complete new set of guidelines and priorities as we go forward? But ultimately, it's for them to consider, and that's why I would rather be as open-minded as I possibly can. At least I'll give them something to consider, whoever that may be. Councillor Young.
Thank you. And I could make a political statement about who'll be chairing the next risk committee, but I'll not. I would like to support my fellow councillor Hagman's areas of interest for the next audit and risk committee, planning and particularly education. I know at the next agenda item we had a look at area committees at the last committee meeting, and I feel the amount of educational information relating to my local schools I'm getting now as a councillor and as chair of the area committee is much less than it was in 2017. So I would like to know what information we should be receiving and why we're not getting it. And education did remarkably well. I'm sure we all agree during COVID, but in many ways, COVID has changed the nature of education. We're very IT-based now in the classroom compared to whiteboard-based even. And I'm just wondering if the Dumfries and Galloway Council has the correct structure at senior level in place now for the present way education is being delivered in the region. And I would really like a wee investigation perhaps into whether we have a structure to support the way education is presently being delivered in the region. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, John. That's much appreciated. It'll not be me, John, I know that. No, sitting here, do your first point. Okay. Don't have any other speakers from what I can see. Claire, could you just, if you've taken notes, is it all right for you just to quickly run over what you've captured, and we'll just, if any members who's made comment in regards to what they've put forward, we can add or subtract. Claire.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've made a quick note, so I'll try and decipher my own handwriting. I've got obviously the 3 points raised by Councillor Hagman, being the planning, being the focus on development planning and control. Education's obviously just got a couple of mentions there with Councillor Young as well, with looking at the support of the delivery of education and obviously the educational needs and the amounts of referrals. There's obviously school transport as well has been mentioned, and Councillor Scobie, how to take forward the reviewing of the unmet need and risk to service users and social care. And obviously Councillor Maitland also made a point on how the risk-based discussions are encouraged across the council. I would make the point as well, when you're looking at 2.3, the recommendation asks to agree any areas for activity in relation to audit risk and scrutiny. Obviously you've made the point yourself, Chair, that at this point possibly you're looking to identify areas for the new council to look at after the election.
Right, Councillor Hagman, I see you're coming in, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was just in relation to the ones that I was referencing there, and I don't know whether it's worth capturing, because I appreciate the points that were made by Councillor Maitland in terms of, the delegation to this subcommittee. And I am aware that certainly, and I think it is maybe important to capture, in terms of the school transport, there are issues where, we're paying external taxi companies at times. So, what is the costs of those and the risks and the scrutiny of paying those external? Because I'm aware, well, certainly on the fourth point of the delegation is to consider external inspections and value for money reports on funding external bodies. So, that specifically for the transport might be useful to capture, and also in terms of the additional needs. And I made reference there to Call Scotland specifically for those with dyslexia who are maybe potentially requiring assistance in technology and additional equipment, which we as a local authority, I understand, but I'm not 100% sure that we don't supply, but we can put referrals to Call Scotland who then supply that. So there are those links with external bodies, which is why I think it is appropriate within the remit of the delegation. But I appreciate the points that have been discussed already. Thank you.
Thank you. And I said development plan, I meant management, sorry, stroke control rather than planning. Yep. Don't see anybody else coming in, so hopefully Katie's captured that okay for everybody. Sorry, Katie. Claire has captured that for everybody. Yep, and we've got the audio recording to reflect back on if needed. Well, thank you. Thanks very much. Item number 7 is the Service and Area Committee reporting and scrutiny arrangements, December 2020 to December 21. The purpose of this report is for members to consider the Service and Area Committee reporting and scrutiny arrangements from December 2020 to 21. Fraser, it looks like it's yourself that's dealing with this. We'll go back to the what I've said previously. Do you want to speak to this at all? Do you want to just go into questions or be guided by yourself, Fraser?
Happy just going to questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. Members, I'm going to open it up to yourselves. What we're looking at is recommendation 2.1 is to consider the reports submitted to the Service Area Committees relating to the business plan performance reports and quality standards and inspection reports from December 2020 to 2021 is set out in the appendix. And we're being asked at 2.2 to agree that the reporting and scrutiny arrangements evidence effective arrangements are in place across our council. So I have got Councillor Hagman coming in for what I can see. Oh, is that? Hold on, let me just double check. I think that's you. No, is it? Are you coming in, Katie?
Yes, me again, Chair. Sorry about this. It's just a sort of small point, and it was alluded to by Councillor Young in terms of reports coming to Area Committee, and the Area Committee isn't included in this. Will there be an opportunity for that to be discussed, or is that up to? Because I am aware that there's a report going to Standing Orders Subcommittee, I believe. I think it's standing orders, but there is a piece of work being done in terms of Area Committee and whether the reports and how they consider reports. So Area Committees aren't referenced in this report. Is that on purpose, or would that be discussed elsewhere? Thank you.
I know there is some. Vlad's got to come in on that one. I know Vlad certainly was at Annandale and Estill Area Committees and others, but I'll just see if it's the same subject matter. Vlad?
Yeah, just to confirm, the title of the report is Service and Area Committee Reporting, and under appendix, under the appendix that you see there, is the very last page. Councillor Hagman mentions the area committees and the reports that have been going up to that, as well as members will be aware that through the area committees we are performance reporting is also going through there at a more local level. So that's already happening, and it should all be within this particular report. So I'm hoping that answers that, but it's certainly area committees are included within the overall appendix.
Do you have a page number there, Vlad? Because I cannot. I'm looking at the last page, which is page 82, and I can't.
It's on 82, area committee, top hand corner.
Right, appreciate that. Yes, I've got that at the top there. Appreciate it. I'd missed the top title of that one because it wasn't contained in the table. No, I appreciate that's coming back. The only comment I would make is certainly at November Area Committee, within education, there was a distinct lack of detail that was passed back within that. And as again, I'll refer back to Councillor Young that the nature of COVID has sort of changed the reporting somewhat with that, but that has been raised at Area Committee level. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much. I'm really just sort of reiterating the issue that members are mentioning over area committees. It's local reporting, and with particular the local education service. I'm not certain I have a total handle on what is actually happening for me locally in my ward as far as the education service is concerned. So I just flag that up as something to be thought about as we go forward. And in addition to which, the locality reports were sparse for obvious reasons over the past 2 years. But I hope very much that those will be gathering some pace and getting a bit more content, a bit more meaty content, so people understand what is happening in those services in their wards. But as a general feeling, I'm with members who think possibly that we could beef up what is happening in terms of local reporting as opposed to strategic reporting. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jane. Thank you. Don't think I have any other comments or questions. Anybody coming up? No, there's not. So 2.1 we've considered, and 2.2, can we agree that the report on scrutiny arrangements, evidence effective arrangements are in place across the council? If we can agree that, we'll move on to item number 8. Thank you. Item number 8 is scrutiny review outcomes achieved from the council's investment in the public social partnership on community transport. So scribes are off in regards to this one. Fraser, this is for yourself again, so the same as last time. Do you want to talk to this? But I'll come to you, Councillor Thompson, after Fraser.
Yeah, just very briefly, Chair. This is just an update on the report that the committee saw in December. Also to update to be more in line with the views expressed by members at the previous meeting of the committee. So hopefully now the report does that, but obviously have to take any questions and comments.
Thanks so much for that, Fraser. Oh, well, we've a couple here. We've got Councillor Campbell and Councillor Dryborough, and I will come to you, Stephen, at some point.
Or do you want me to go ahead?
Please, John. Yep.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was just to pick up on a point that the public social partnership. Now it mentions in, let me just get it back, 3.7 on page 84. That the partnership involves, there's the third sector, Dumfries and Galloway, Annandale Community Transport, NHS, Galloway Community Transport. But on page 89, when we had the workshop, it was pointed out, especially on the last bullet point, that it was acknowledged that Dumfries and Galloway Council is the only partner organisation to provide funding for the PSP. Now, if it's a truly social partnership, I would have thought that the funding would have been, coming from other sources other than the council. I mean, is it just the council that's having to pick up the tab in pushing this forward? I'd like, somebody to explain to me if that's possible to get the funding from other partners in this PSP. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, John. We'll go to you, Fraser. I don't know if Fraser, will let you do that first. I don't know if Douglas can pass it. Sorry, Douglas, you're there.
I was going to suggest.
Good man, Douglas.
Come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Campbell. Yes, we have had some attempts to get other funding, as you probably have reported this to the West Strands Board, which you're a member of as well. And yes, so we have approached NHS, Dumfries and Galloway. We are looking at different models through that, how we can actually fund that. I actually had a meeting with the National Health Directorate of Scottish Government this week, again talking about funding and funding streams for the PSP. And we have been successful in gathering some funding through SOS over the last 2 or 3 months as well. So funding bids do go in, and it's just a matter of breaking down the barriers within organisations to allow them to fund transport interventions going forward. But it is certainly part of our business plan going forward as well.
Yeah, thanks very much. Maybe I should have declared an interest there, Chair, of being a member of West Strands.
No, thanks very much for that. Right, so we've got Councillor Dryburgh next, and then Stephen, if nobody else comes in. Oh no, Councillor Maitland's come in. I'm going to leave you to get the last word in this, Stephen, so apologies for that.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. I'm looking at the emerging recommendations in page 88, and I think the report's a good one, and the recommendations are excellent in all of it. I think maybe to try and reduce the amount of recommendation is to merge recommendation 1 into recommendation 2, which covers both diversity and people with disabilities, particularly as drivers, linking with DG Voice. It's really a little bit, I'm not bothered either way. I'm quite happy to put the 5 recommendations forward. It's just a bit of tidying up and things like that. But I think the emerging recommendations are good. They should go forward, but just a bit of tidying up between recommendation 1 and 2.
Thanks, Archie. It sounds good to me. Jane says she's no need to speak. I don't have any other speakers, and that was where I just got to try and bring the focus of the committee on to. So nobody else, Stephen? Oh, Wally. Sorry, Wally.
It's really just to support what Archie was saying there, Chair, in terms of the recommendations, and it maybe touches on what John was saying as well. While it's the council and the only council that provide the funding, it's pretty sparse in terms of just below 14,000. 13,595 to deliver indeed what is outlined in the appendices and is captured in 3.10, where funding is going to be crucial if we're going to continue with the public social partnership, with the services they do deliver in local areas. So it'll be interesting to see, in terms of what Douglas says and where we can get source funding to keep this going.
Yeah, thanks for that, Willie. I think peanuts was the language that I used at the workshop, because it is 13,595 is compared to the contribution they certainly used to get, even from Area Committee. I know NHS did used to put a large contribution in Andale and Eskdale in particular, but I think it's right. So maybe we can, when we get to the final point, maybe if you want to make a particular comment, you want that change, we can look at that, Willie. Jane, you're not coming in, so Stephen, definitely you this time. Don't see anybody else coming in.
Thanks, Chair. It's very kind of you to leave me at the end. Yeah, no, I think it's a good report, and I think there is something about the recommendations. Consider them as one broad diversification exercise in terms of developing the volunteer base, which would include, everybody who's interested, basically, and making those adjustments to support that. In terms of the funding side of things, it did seem to specify the funding routes to deliver the carbon reduction options. There is a broader question about ongoing funding, and Councillor Campbell touched on that already. So I think that is something that we did hear from Douglas there, that he's been speaking to various bodies about potential funding, and there is an ongoing piece of work to maybe break down those barriers, as it were, culturally, maybe within organisations. So that's maybe an ongoing piece of work that we should factor into the recommendations, not just about carbon reduction options, but generally funding, and that partnership approach. But otherwise, I think it's a good report, and I think it's something we should keep an eye on as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes just trying to get these recommendations right, because Stephen, you'll be speaking to this on the day, because it's yourself who brought this particular scrutiny review forward. It's been a thorough and I would say, review in regards to this. What the most positive outcomes for the full council to agree as it takes it forward. So, and as far as recommendations 1 and 2, we can join them together. I think that's okay with that. Everybody's agreed with that. Don't see anybody coming in. If anybody's wanting to come in, just come in and speak, or hands up. Recommendation 3. Now, Willie, you've made particular comments in regards to the first bullet point. I think maybe you've announced, Stephen, but is there anything you want to change of that, Willie?
Well, Stephen just touched on it there in terms of what Douglas is looking at it as possible funding sources. I think we've seriously got to look at, that as funding, and whether that actually is what the overall cost of running the transport network of the public social partnerships that falls well behind it, and try to see what is required in the service that's delivered, and the value that we get back from it, and to equate that and then come to something more realistic in terms of what funding may be provided.
Thanks for that, Willie. So before I bring Stephen in as well to make comment, Douglas is wanting to come in and add some kind of value, I think, to what's been said there.
Well, I don't know about value, Chair, but I'll try. It's just a recommendation 4 kind of touches on that in relation to all partners looking at avenues for funding. So perhaps recommendation 3 was specific to the little bit of funding that the council has available. Currently, also, Communities Committee funds the PSP through its poverty strategy money. For this current year, whether or not that'll continue after the budget setting process this year, we'll have to wait and see. But they are certainly recommendation 4 is certainly looking at all the community, going through the community planning partners to all our community planning partners to look at their funding arrangements to keep the PSP running and to actually expand it. And as part of the new public transport model that's been agreed by the committee, by Communities Committee, is we're looking at a transition to a new public transport model, and we're looking to mainstream the PSP into that model. So it will be part of ongoing funding rather than need to come for annual funding beyond that.
Archie, are you coming in?
Yeah, please, Chair. It's in that particular point that Douglas says, and I agree with him. It's the community planning partners as well to get their proverbial finger out and get some funding for these guys. But I just wonder if there's an opportunity elsewhere within council. I mean, we do the Coastal Communities Fund. We do all sorts of things where there's potential for funding for, or I should say, opportunities for funding for the community transport partnership. So I'm just wondering if we, not so much expanding it, but not forgetting we've put something in as a council, but there are other opportunities within funding streams.
Thank you, Archie. I don't know if everyone just went blank there. John, are you coming in? We'll come back to that particular point, John.
Yeah, it's much on the same point, Chair. It's just for a bit of clarity, really, because my understanding is that the Annandale community bus and the Galloway one and others, they actually do get funding from elsewhere. You know, I mean, it's not just the 13,595 that the PSP's putting in. You know, they do seek funding. So maybe if Douglas could clarify that.
They definitely do, John, but Douglas couldn't clarify that.
I was just going to come back and say exactly that, Chair. Yes, they do have other funding streams which they can tap into as well. So it's not just this. This is only for the actual operation of the PSP.
Yeah, thanks, Douglas.
Well, thanks. So I suppose that if we can capture within the minute that we look to expand. So for by that, we've been specific about the 13,595, but the wider potential funding routes. And I think we're saying that the council should help and assist whatever they can in regards to them being sourced. If everybody's content with that, are you content with that, Stephen? Is the last word?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Doug, I think the 13,595 isn't all of the money involved in community transport. I think that's specific to fulfilling that role of, you know, overseeing the PSP. So I think that is what it is, and I think that as long as we're allocating that, I think that's what's delivering the best value for money, as it says. But in terms of recommendation 4, yeah, I think we shouldn't limit ourselves there, I think, just to community planning partners, because there are other sources of funding, whether it's external or through other bodies that may come into being, or whether it's direct negotiation with government departments or whatever it might be. So I think we should always be open to exploring as many as we can that's going to support this going forward. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe better put in recommendation 4, and Stephen, maybe get you to liaise with Claire in regards to the particular wording around about that, but you want to expand that beyond the community planning partnership. That sounds good to me. We're happy with everything else. Yep. So we've considered 2.1, considered 2.2, and we've agreed to submit the final report to the full council at the 31st of March. Steve will lead in that. Certainly more than happy to support wherever I can, Stephen, but it's your particular subject matter. I wouldn't want to steal your thunder. Claire, is there any particular points that you need clarified before we close this meeting in regards to this? No, Claire's got everything captured. She can listen back to the audio recording. Everybody comfortable today? John Campbell's hand up. Nobody else wanting coming in? I think that's it. Don't have any other comment business. Let's double check. I haven't got any. Number 9. We can be bad for that. Would I miss it? No, I'm not. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. It's this is the penultimate meeting. One to go. One to go. Cannot wait, can we? It's we're looking forward to not the full council 31st of March. Looking forward to Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee in March as well. Thanks everybody for your attendance today, and we'll see you again in the future. Thank you very much.